Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast where we explore global politics and international relations in a simple and thoughtful way. Today, we are starting a very important discussion about how the world is changing and how new partnerships between countries are shaping the future of global power. Over the past few decades, many people believed that the world was dominated mainly by one major superpower. But today, the international system is becoming far more complex, more competitive, and more unpredictable than before. Analysts, scholars, and policymakers are increasingly talking about a possible shift toward what they call a multipolar world, a world where several powerful countries influence global politics rather than a single dominant state.
In this changing environment, three countries are receiving a lot of attention from experts and governments around the world: Iran, Russia, and China. These three countries are geographically different, culturally different, and politically different in many ways. But in recent years, they have been increasing their cooperation across several important areas, including energy, military coordination, diplomacy, and economic partnerships. Because of these growing connections, many observers are asking an important question. Are these countries forming a new geopolitical partnership that could influence the balance of power in global politics?
To understand why this discussion is becoming more common, we first need to understand how the international system has been evolving. After the end of the Cold War in 1991, the global balance of power shifted dramatically. The collapse of the Soviet Union left the United States as the most powerful country in the world, and for many years, international politics appeared to revolve around American influence, Western institutions, and global economic integration. However, history never remains static, and over the past 2 decades, new powers have risen, new alliances have formed, and many countries have begun to pursue more independent foreign policies.
For example, China has grown into one of the largest economic powers in human history, becoming a central player in global trade, manufacturing, and technology. At the same time, Russia has tried to reassert itself as a major geopolitical actor, especially in Eurasia and the Middle East, while Iran has continued to play a critical role in the politics and security of the Middle East. These developments have created a new strategic landscape where countries are searching for partners, alliances, and cooperation that can strengthen their position in an increasingly competitive world.
In recent years, cooperation between these three countries has expanded in noticeable ways. Diplomatic meetings between their leaders have become more frequent, economic partnerships have grown stronger, and their militaries have occasionally conducted joint exercises designed to improve coordination and demonstrate strategic cooperation. In fact, Iran and Russia even signed a 20-year strategic partnership agreement designed to strengthen cooperation in areas such as defense, energy, and trade, highlighting how their relationship is becoming more structured and long-term.
Beyond bilateral partnerships, these countries are also participating in international organizations and forums that bring them closer together. One example is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a regional group that includes major Eurasian countries and focuses on economic cooperation, security coordination, and diplomatic dialogue. Meetings within this organization have provided opportunities for Iran, Russia, and China to strengthen communication and coordinate their positions on regional and global issues.
Another important factor shaping this relationship is the global debate about the future structure of international politics. Many policymakers in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran frequently speak about the idea of a multipolar world, meaning a world where power is distributed among several major countries rather than concentrated in a single global superpower. Scholars often note that cooperation between these states is partly motivated by a shared desire to balance Western influence and create alternative economic and diplomatic networks. Of course, this does not mean that these three countries have identical goals or that they agree on every issue. International partnerships are rarely simple, and even countries that cooperate closely often have different priorities, economic interests, and regional strategies. However, the growing interactions between these three states have raised many questions among analysts, journalists, and governments around the world about how their relationship might develop in the future.
That is really fascinating, Adam. because when people hear about these countries cooperating, they often imagine a powerful alliance forming somewhere behind the scenes. But many listeners might still be wondering something very basic and very important. Why exactly are these countries getting closer to each other now? What are the strategic interests that bring them together despite their different political systems, cultures, and geographic locations?
For example, is this cooperation mainly about economics and energy trade, or is it more about military strategy and global security? Are these countries trying to challenge Western influence in global politics, or are they simply pursuing their own national interests in a rapidly changing world? And perhaps the biggest question of all is whether this partnership represents a temporary alignment of interests or the beginning of a deeper long-term geopolitical relationship. Those are excellent questions, Julia, and they are exactly the questions that analysts around the world are debating today. In the next part of our discussion, we are going to explore the reasons why these countries are strengthening their cooperation, the strategic interests that connect them, and what this evolving relationship might mean for the future of global politics.
Before we continue to the next section, where we will explore the strategic partnership between Iran and Russia in more detail, we would love to hear from you. If you are enjoying this discussion and learning new things about global politics, make sure to subscribe to the channel like this episode and share it with your friends who are interested in international relations. Your support helps this channel grow and allows us to continue creating clear and educational content about the most important events shaping our world today.
In the previous section, we introduced the idea that the international system is changing and that cooperation between Iran, Russia, and China has become an important topic in global politics. Now, the natural question is very simple but very important. Why are these three countries getting closer to each other? What strategic interests are encouraging them to cooperate more often in diplomacy, economics, and sometimes even military coordination? When analysts study international relations, they often say that countries do not build partnerships simply because they like each other. Instead, they cooperate when their interests begin to overlap.
That is a really important point, Adam, because when people hear about countries cooperating, they sometimes imagine emotional friendships between governments. But in reality, international politics is usually driven by practical goals and national interests. In the case of these three countries, many experts say one of the biggest reasons for their growing cooperation is that they all want to reduce the influence of the United States and its Western allies in global affairs. This does not necessarily mean they agree on everything, but it does mean they share a similar perspective about the structure of the international system.
Exactly, Julia. For many years, global politics has been influenced strongly by Western institutions, alliances, and economic systems. Organizations like NATO, international financial institutions, and Western political partnerships have played a central role in shaping global decisions. However, countries such as Iran, Russia, and China often argue that the world should not be dominated by one group of countries or by a single global power. Instead, they frequently promote the idea of a more balanced international system, where several major powers share influence.
This idea is often described using a term that appears frequently in international relations discussions: a multipolar world. In a multipolar system, power is distributed among several strong countries instead of being concentrated in one dominant superpower. Supporters of this concept argue that it could create a more balanced and diverse global order where different regions and civilizations have a stronger voice in global decision-making.
From the perspective of Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran, a multipolar world could allow them to protect their national interests more effectively and reduce the pressure they sometimes feel from Western sanctions, political criticism, or military alliances. Over the past 2 decades, these countries have often experienced tensions with Western governments, especially regarding security policies, economic restrictions, and regional conflicts. As a result, cooperating with each other can provide political support and strategic flexibility.
Another reason for their cooperation is economic opportunity. Each of these countries has resources or economic strengths that complement the others. For example, Iran possesses large energy reserves, including oil and natural gas. China has one of the world's largest manufacturing and technology sectors and constantly needs energy to support its massive economy. Meanwhile, Russia has extensive energy resources and a powerful defense industry, which makes it an important strategic partner for both countries.
Energy cooperation is especially important in these relationships. Oil and natural gas are still among the most valuable resources in the global economy, and countries that produce or transport energy often have significant geopolitical influence. Partnerships between energy producers and large energy consumers can therefore create long-term economic ties that strengthen diplomatic relationships.
Security concerns also play a role. In different regions of the world, these countries face various strategic challenges, including regional conflicts, political instability, and competition from other global powers. By maintaining diplomatic communication and occasional military cooperation, they can signal that they are not isolated and that they have partners willing to coordinate on certain issues.
We can see this cooperation sometimes in joint military exercises, diplomatic meetings, and coordinated positions in international organizations. Although these activities do not necessarily mean they are forming a formal military alliance, they demonstrate that the countries are willing to communicate and collaborate in areas where their interests overlap.
Another factor is technological and economic development. China has become a major investor in infrastructure projects across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. These investments often include transportation networks, ports, railways, and energy facilities. For countries like Iran and Russia, economic cooperation with China can open opportunities for trade and development, even when Western sanctions limit other partnerships.
Of course, it is important to remember that cooperation does not mean complete agreement. Each country still has its own national priorities, regional interests, and long-term strategies. Sometimes their goals may align closely, while at other times they may diverge. International partnerships are often flexible arrangements rather than permanent alliances.
That is a key point for our listeners to understand. The relationship between Iran, Russia, and China is complex. It includes economic cooperation, diplomatic coordination, and strategic dialogue. But it is not necessarily the same as a formal alliance, like some military blocs in history. Instead, it is better understood as a partnership built around shared interests in certain areas.
However, even this kind of flexible cooperation can have important global consequences. When major countries coordinate their policies, it can influence energy markets, regional conflicts, trade routes, and international negotiations. That is why analysts around the world carefully watch the relationship between these three countries and try to understand how it might evolve in the future. Now that we have discussed why countries sometimes cooperate in international politics, let us focus more closely on one of the most important partnerships shaping current geopolitics: the growing strategic relationship between Iran and Russia. Over the past several years, these two countries have moved closer together through agreements that expand cooperation in energy, military coordination, trade, and regional security. For many analysts, this partnership represents one of the most significant geopolitical developments in Eurasia and the Middle East.
That's interesting, Adam, because historically these two countries have not always been close allies. In fact, their relationship has changed many times over the past 2 centuries. Sometimes they were competitors, and sometimes they cooperated on regional issues. But today, it seems that strategic circumstances are bringing them closer together again.
Exactly, Julia. In international relations, partnerships often evolve depending on global circumstances. In recent years, both Iran and Russia have faced economic sanctions and political pressure from Western countries, particularly the United States and several European governments. These sanctions have affected trade, financial systems, and access to international markets, encouraging both countries to look for alternative partnerships and economic networks. One of the most important moments in this relationship came in 2025, when the two countries signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement designed to strengthen their long-term cooperation across many areas of politics, defense, and economic development. The agreement aims to expand trade, improve energy cooperation, and deepen diplomatic coordination between the two governments.
So this agreement is not just about political symbolism, it actually includes concrete areas of cooperation, right?
Yes, it does. The treaty encourages collaboration in many sectors, including energy production, transportation, technology, defense coordination, intelligence sharing, and scientific research. It also emphasizes that both countries will strengthen cooperation in regional security issues and global diplomatic forums. Energy cooperation is one of the most important foundations of this partnership. Both Iran and Russia are among the world's largest energy producers, with vast reserves of oil and natural gas. Instead of competing with each other in global markets, they have increasingly begun exploring ways to coordinate production, share infrastructure, and develop new energy projects together. For example, Russian energy companies have been involved in large investment projects in Iranian gas fields and energy infrastructure.
And energy cooperation also connects to broader economic partnerships, right? Because when countries work together in energy projects, they usually build trade routes, pipelines, and financial agreements as well.
That's correct. Energy partnerships often lead to wider economic integration. Russia and Iran have been expanding trade across sectors such as agriculture, industrial goods, transportation equipment, and technology. Trade between the two countries has grown steadily in recent years, and both governments are trying to increase the use of their national currencies instead of relying heavily on the US dollar in international transactions. Another important element of this relationship is transportation and trade infrastructure. Both countries are working on developing new trade corridors that connect Russia to the Middle East, South Asia, and beyond. One example is the International North-South Transport Corridor, a large network of shipping routes, railways, and roads that aims to connect Russia to India through Iran. This corridor could significantly reduce transportation time for goods traveling between Eurasia and South Asia.
That sounds like a major economic project. But what about security cooperation? Many people associate the Russia-Iran relationship with military coordination.
Security cooperation has indeed become another important part of the partnership. The two countries have expanded discussions about regional security, counterterrorism efforts, and defense technology cooperation. While their partnership does not create a formal military alliance, it includes provisions for closer military technical cooperation and coordination on security challenges in regions such as the Middle East and Central Asia. This security cooperation is partly driven by shared strategic concerns. Both governments want to maintain stability in regions close to their borders and reduce the influence of rival powers in areas that they consider strategically important. As a result, they often coordinate diplomatic positions in international organizations and regional negotiations.
So in a way, this partnership helps both countries strengthen their geopolitical position in an increasingly competitive international system.
Exactly. By working together economically, politically, and strategically, Iran and Russia can increase their ability to influence regional developments and protect their national interests. At the same time, they also send a signal to the world that they are not isolated and that they have partners willing to cooperate in building alternative economic and political networks. However, it is important to remember that even strong partnerships in international politics have limits. Iran and Russia still have different priorities and sometimes different regional strategies. Their cooperation is based primarily on shared interests rather than identical political goals.
That's an important reminder for our listeners. International partnerships are rarely perfect alliances. They are usually flexible relationships that evolve as global conditions change.
Exactly, Julia. And in today's rapidly changing geopolitical environment, partnerships like the one between Iran and Russia are likely to continue evolving as both countries respond to new challenges, economic opportunities, and global political developments. To understand the broader relationship between Iran, Russia, and China, we must now focus on the economic dimension of this partnership, particularly the role of China in the global energy system. Over the past 2 decades, China has experienced extraordinary economic growth, transforming itself into one of the largest economies in the world and one of the most important centers of global manufacturing. This rapid development has created a massive demand for energy resources such as oil and natural gas. As a result, China has become the world's largest importer of crude oil, bringing in more than 11 million barrels per day to support its industries, transportation systems, and growing cities.
This enormous energy demand means that China must maintain reliable relationships with countries that produce oil and natural gas. Unlike some countries that have large domestic energy resources, China depends heavily on imported energy supplies to keep its economy running smoothly. That is why energy security has become one of the most important priorities in Chinese foreign policy. In simple terms, China must make sure that energy supplies continue flowing into the country without disruption, because any major interruption could affect factories, transportation systems, and economic growth across the nation.
One of the countries that plays a significant role in this energy strategy is Iran. Iran possesses some of the largest oil and natural gas reserves in the world, and despite facing international sanctions, it remains an important energy supplier for several countries. Over time, China has emerged as Iran's most important energy customer. In fact, recent trade data shows that China purchases the majority of Iran's exported crude oil, sometimes accounting for more than 80% of Iran's shipments to global markets.
That statistic really shows how interconnected these economies have become. For Iran, selling oil to China provides a critical economic lifeline, especially during periods when Western sanctions restrict its ability to sell energy to other markets. For China, purchasing Iranian oil offers another advantage as well: price. Iranian crude is often sold at discounted prices compared with other global suppliers, making it attractive for Chinese refineries that are constantly searching for affordable energy sources to keep production costs low.
Another interesting aspect of this relationship is how much oil China actually imports from Iran each year. Analysts estimate that China has been purchasing around 1.3 to 1.4 million barrels of Iranian oil per day in recent years, representing a significant portion of its total imports. While China also buys oil from countries such as Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Iraq, Iranian supplies remain an important part of the country's energy portfolio, helping diversify its energy sources and reduce dependence on any single supplier.
But the relationship between China and Iran is not limited only to oil trade. Another important dimension is infrastructure development. Over the past decade, China has invested billions of dollars in infrastructure projects across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. These projects include railways, highways, ports, pipelines, and industrial zones designed to improve transportation and trade connections between regions. Many of these investments are linked to China's broader global development strategy aimed at strengthening international economic networks.
Within Iran, these investments can include projects related to energy infrastructure, transportation networks, and industrial development. For example, Chinese companies have been involved in projects to develop Iranian oil and gas fields, modernize transportation routes, and improve trade corridors that connect Iran to neighboring countries. These projects can help Iran expand its economic capacity while also strengthening China's access to energy resources and regional trade routes.
Infrastructure investment also plays an important role in improving trade efficiency. When countries build better ports, railways, and pipelines, it becomes easier and faster to transport goods, including energy resources such as oil and natural gas. For China, supporting infrastructure development in energy-producing countries can help secure long-term supply chains that are essential for maintaining economic stability and industrial production at home.
Another factor that strengthens China's economic relationship with Iran is long-term strategic planning. In 2021, the two countries signed a long-term cooperation agreement that aims to expand economic ties over several decades. This agreement includes potential investments in energy, transportation, technology, and trade sectors, reflecting a broader vision of long-term partnership between the two countries. Analysts often describe this agreement as part of China's strategy to secure reliable energy supplies for the future.
From Iran's perspective, this partnership with China offers an opportunity to attract foreign investment, even while facing economic pressure from sanctions. By cooperating with Chinese companies and financial institutions, Iran can continue developing important sectors of its economy while maintaining access to global trade networks through Asian markets. In this way, economic cooperation with China becomes a critical component of Iran's long-term economic strategy.
At the same time, China benefits from access to large energy reserves in strategic geographic locations. Iran sits at the crossroads of several important trade routes connecting the Middle East, Central Asia, and South Asia. Strengthening economic ties with Iran therefore helps China expand its presence in a region that is extremely important for global energy flows and international trade.
However, it is important to understand that this economic cooperation also exists within a complicated global political environment. Energy markets are influenced not only by economics, but also by diplomacy, sanctions, and regional conflicts. As a result, China must carefully balance its economic interests with broader international relationships while maintaining stable energy supplies for its growing economy.
Despite these challenges, the economic partnership between China and Iran continues to play a significant role in the wider geopolitical landscape. Energy trade, infrastructure investment, and long-term strategic planning have created strong economic links that connect these two countries in ways that affect regional development and global energy markets.
In the next section, we will explore another important dimension of this story: the military cooperation and joint exercises that sometimes take place between Iran, Russia, and China, and what these activities reveal about the strategic relationship between these countries in today's rapidly changing world.
As we continue exploring the growing cooperation between Iran, Russia, and China, another important dimension to examine is military cooperation. While these three countries are not part of a formal military alliance, they have increasingly demonstrated their willingness to coordinate in security matters. One of the clearest examples of this cooperation is the series of joint naval exercises that their militaries have conducted over the past several years. These exercises take place mainly in strategically important maritime regions and are carefully observed by analysts and governments around the world.
That's right, Adam. When countries conduct joint military exercises, they are not only training their forces, but also sending signals to the international community. These activities allow different militaries to practice coordination, communication, and operational strategies. In the case of Iran, Russia, and China, the exercises often involve naval forces practicing tasks such as maritime security operations, search and rescue missions, and defensive maneuvers designed to improve cooperation at sea.
One of the most notable examples occurred during joint naval drills held in waters near the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. These regions are extremely important for global shipping and energy transportation because they connect the Persian Gulf to major international sea routes. During these exercises, naval vessels from the three countries conducted coordinated operations, including tactical maneuvers, maritime patrols, and joint communication exercises designed to strengthen cooperation between their naval forces.
For many observers, the location of these exercises is particularly significant. The Gulf of Oman and surrounding waters lie close to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important energy choke points in the world. A large percentage of the world's oil shipments pass through this narrow waterway every day. Because of its strategic importance, any military activity in this region naturally attracts international attention.
Exactly. When countries conduct joint exercises in such a critical maritime region, it can carry both practical and symbolic meaning. On the practical side, naval forces gain valuable experience working together, learning how to communicate effectively, coordinate navigation systems, and respond to potential maritime security challenges. On the symbolic side, the exercises demonstrate that these countries are willing to cooperate strategically and coordinate their actions in areas of shared interest.
Another important element of these drills is that they often include different types of military equipment and units. Warships, helicopters, maritime patrol aircraft, and support vessels can all participate in training scenarios. By practicing together, military commanders can evaluate how their forces operate in multinational environments and identify areas where coordination could improve in future operations.
From a strategic perspective, these exercises also send a message about diplomatic relationships. Military drills do not necessarily indicate that countries are preparing for conflict, but they can demonstrate political alignment or mutual interest in maintaining regional stability. For Iran, Russia, and China, joint exercises can signal that they are willing to collaborate in maintaining maritime security and protecting important trade routes.
At the same time, it is important to understand that these exercises are not unusual in international relations. Many countries conduct joint drills with partners around the world. For example, NATO members frequently train together to improve interoperability among their forces. In the same way, Iran, Russia, and China may conduct exercises to strengthen their own communication and coordination capabilities.
Military analysts often study these exercises carefully to understand their scale and purpose. Some drills involve only a small number of ships and focus mainly on training tasks, while others may include larger formations and more complex scenarios. The level of participation can sometimes indicate how closely the participating countries are willing to cooperate in security matters.
Another interesting aspect is that these exercises can help build trust between military institutions. When officers and sailors from different countries train together, they develop professional relationships and gain a better understanding of each other's procedures and capabilities. This kind of interaction can sometimes reduce misunderstandings and improve communication during times of regional tension.
For countries like Iran, Russia, and China, maritime cooperation is especially important because global trade depends heavily on sea transportation. Ships carry energy resources, industrial goods, and consumer products across oceans every day. Protecting these shipping routes from threats such as piracy, smuggling, or maritime accidents is therefore a major concern for many governments.
However, it is also important to remember that despite these exercises, Iran, Russia, and China still maintain independent military strategies. Each country has its own defense priorities, geographic challenges, and national security goals. Their cooperation is therefore selective and focused mainly on areas where their interests overlap.
Exactly. International partnerships often operate on a spectrum. At one end are formal alliances with mutual defense agreements, and at the other end are limited partnerships focused on specific issues. The relationship between these three countries currently appears to fall somewhere in the middle, involving strategic dialogue and occasional military coordination without forming a full alliance.
In the next section, we will explore another crucial factor shaping the relationship between these countries: the importance of global energy routes and why strategic locations like the Strait of Hormuz play such a critical role in global politics and economic stability.
To truly understand the strategic importance of the Middle East and the partnerships we've been discussing, we must now turn our attention to one of the most critical elements of global economics and geopolitics: energy routes. Around the world, countries depend heavily on oil and natural gas to power industries, transportation systems, electricity generation, and modern economies. Because energy resources are not evenly distributed across the planet, nations must transport oil and gas across long distances using pipelines, tankers, and shipping routes that connect producing regions to global markets. Among all the energy routes in the world, one narrow waterway stands out as especially important: the Strait of Hormuz. This strait lies between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, and serves as a vital maritime corridor linking the oil-producing countries of the Middle East to the global economy. Despite being only about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, it carries an enormous volume of energy shipments every single day.
That narrow passage may look small on a map, but its importance is enormous. In fact, energy analysts often describe the Strait of Hormuz as the world's most important oil choke point. A choke point is a geographic location where shipping traffic must pass through a narrow route, making it extremely significant for global trade and energy supply chains. If something disrupts transportation through such a choke point, the consequences can affect economies across the entire world.
According to global energy statistics, roughly 1/5 of the world's daily oil consumption passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That means millions of barrels of crude oil travel through this waterway every day on massive oil tankers heading toward markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates rely on this route to export their energy resources to the global market.
For large energy importing countries, this route is just as important as it is for producers. Nations like China, India, Japan, and South Korea depend heavily on oil shipments that travel through this region. These economies require steady and predictable energy supplies to keep factories running, transportation networks operating, and millions of people employed in industries connected to global trade.
Because so much of the world's energy passes through this narrow corridor, stability in the surrounding region becomes extremely important for global economic security. Any disruption to shipping traffic in the Strait of Hormuz can quickly affect oil prices around the world. Even rumors of tension or conflict in the area sometimes cause markets to react, demonstrating just how sensitive global energy systems are to developments in this region.
That is why governments, energy companies, and international organizations closely monitor events in the Persian Gulf. When tensions rise in the region, analysts immediately begin discussing potential impacts on oil supply chains and global markets. Energy traders watch shipping activity, insurance costs for tankers, and political developments that might influence the safe passage of vessels through the strait.
The importance of this waterway also explains why many major powers maintain a strong interest in the region's security environment. For decades, international naval forces have operated in nearby waters to help protect shipping routes and ensure that commercial vessels can travel safely. Maritime patrols, escort missions, and surveillance operations are often used to monitor the flow of traffic and maintain stability along these crucial trade routes.
Another interesting aspect of the Strait of Hormuz is that geography itself plays a powerful role in shaping international politics. Because the strait is so narrow, there are limited alternative routes for transporting oil out of the Persian Gulf. Some pipelines exist that bypass the strait, but their capacity is far smaller than the massive volume of oil normally transported by tanker ships.
This geographic reality means that the Strait of Hormuz will likely remain one of the most strategically significant waterways in the world for many years to come. As long as global economies continue to rely heavily on oil and natural gas, countries will depend on secure shipping routes to move energy resources from producers to consumers.
It also explains why many international discussions about energy security often focus on protecting choke points like this one. Governments understand that global prosperity depends not only on producing energy, but also on transporting it safely and efficiently across oceans and continents.
For countries like Iran, Russia, and China, the stability of these energy routes has direct strategic implications. Iran sits geographically near the Strait of Hormuz. Russia is one of the world's largest energy producers, and China is the largest importer of oil. Each of these countries therefore has strong reasons to pay close attention to developments in the region.
When analysts examine global geopolitics, they often emphasize that control over resources and transportation routes can shape the balance of power between nations. Access to energy supplies influences economic strength, industrial productivity, and even military capabilities.
In other words, energy routes are not just economic pathways. They are also strategic lifelines for the modern world. Understanding how these routes operate helps us understand why certain regions become central to global politics and why cooperation or tension in those regions can have consequences far beyond their geographic borders. As we examine the growing strategic ties between Iran, Russia, and China, it's important to understand how Western countries perceive this partnership. Governments in Europe, North America, and other allied nations have been closely monitoring developments in this trilateral relationship. Analysts and policymakers are particularly focused on the implications for global security, energy markets, and regional stability. Because these countries are pursuing greater coordination in economics, diplomacy, and military exercises, the West sees potential shifts in the balance of power that could influence international affairs for years to come.
Exactly, Adam. From the perspective of Western governments, this cooperation is often interpreted as a geopolitical counterbalance to Western influence, particularly that of United States and the NATO alliance. When countries coordinate in trade, energy, and security matters outside of Western-led frameworks, it can potentially reduce Western leverage over global economic and political decisions. Many analysts describe the Iran-Russia-China partnership as a way to challenge Western dominance without directly confronting it militarily.
Yes, Julia, and we should remember that Western assessments are not always uniform. Some policymakers see this partnership as a significant strategic challenge, while others view it as manageable, especially if it remains limited to specific areas like energy and infrastructure. However, the frequency of joint exercises, high-level diplomatic meetings, and coordinated statements in international forums has certainly attracted a great deal of attention in capitals like Washington, London, and Brussels.
One area of concern for the West is energy security. The fact that China imports large volumes of Iranian and Russian oil, sometimes circumventing Western sanctions, creates economic and geopolitical challenges. For Western countries, these developments complicate efforts to maintain coordinated sanctions regimes, influence global oil prices, and apply diplomatic pressure on countries that may be engaging in activities contrary to Western interests.
Absolutely, Julia. In addition to economic considerations, the West also monitors military cooperation closely. Joint naval exercises, coordinated missile drills, and defense dialogues between Iran, Russia, and China are watched carefully by intelligence and defense agencies. Even if these exercises are largely defensive or symbolic, they demonstrate a level of coordination that Western analysts cannot ignore.
I agree, Adam. From a strategic perspective, NATO and Western governments recognize that coordinated partnerships outside their alliance frameworks can serve as leverage in regional disputes. While the West does not necessarily expect a formal military alliance among these countries, the alignment of strategic interests in areas such as the Persian Gulf, Central Asia, and the South China Sea can create new challenges in crisis management scenarios.
Another point that Western analysts often emphasize is the role of diplomacy in this trilateral relationship. Iran, Russia, and China frequently coordinate their positions in international organizations such as the United Nations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and other regional forums. By presenting a united front in negotiations on issues like sanctions, trade, or security, these countries increase their bargaining power and reduce the unilateral influence of the West.
Yes, and Adam, this diplomatic coordination is also linked to messaging. When these countries issue joint statements or conduct high-profile meetings, It sends a clear signal to the international community that they are aligned on certain issues. Western analysts often interpret these signals as part of a broader effort to shape global norms, influence regional outcomes, and create alternative centers of power.
Exactly, Julia. It's also worth noting that Western governments sometimes use these developments to justify strengthening their own alliances. For example, increased coordination among Iran, Russia, and China has led NATO to emphasize military readiness in Eastern Europe, cybersecurity measures, and partnerships with other Indo-Pacific nations. In other words, the West views these moves as a reason to reinforce its own strategic networks.
I completely agree, Adam. Another element the West pays attention to is economic influence. China's investments in infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, combined with energy cooperation with Iran and Russia, create networks that operate partially outside Western-dominated financial institutions. This economic expansion can reduce Western leverage over trade and investment flows in key regions.
Yes, and this partly explains why Western analysts describe this trilateral cooperation as a geopolitical counterbalance. By strengthening economic, military, and diplomatic ties, these three countries are effectively creating alternatives to Western-led systems. This does not mean confrontation is inevitable, but it does introduce a degree of complexity into international relations that Western countries must navigate carefully.
And Adam, from my perspective, this complexity requires nuanced policy responses. It is not simply a matter of seeing the partnership as a threat. It is also about understanding where shared interests could lead to cooperation. For instance, Iran, Russia, and China sometimes align on issues like global economic reform, climate policy, or multilateral development projects, which could create opportunities for engagement even amid strategic competition.
Exactly, Julia. That is why Western assessments are often a mix of caution and pragmatism. While there is concern about potential challenges to Western influence, there is also recognition that engagement, negotiation, and selective cooperation may be necessary to address global challenges, from energy security to regional stability and international trade.
I completely confirm your point, Adam. Understanding the motivations behind this partnership is crucial. Western governments are not only observing military drills or energy cooperation, they are trying to anticipate how long-term strategic alignment between Iran, Russia, and China could influence everything from sanctions enforcement to global financial stability.
Yes, Julia, I fully agree. The key takeaway is that the West is watching closely, analyzing carefully, and preparing for multiple scenarios. This does not necessarily mean conflict is inevitable, but it does show that the emergence of a coordinated Iran-Russia-China partnership has fundamentally changed how Western policymakers view the strategic landscape.
Absolutely, Adam. And I also confirm that this observation reflects a broader pattern in global politics. When multiple powerful nations begin coordinating across economics, diplomacy, and military matters, even limited cooperation can shift calculations in other parts of the world. The West's careful observation is a direct response to this evolving geopolitical reality.
Exactly, Julia. Both economic and military coordination, combined with diplomatic alignment, gives these countries a significant platform to influence international decision-making. Western governments recognize that even small shifts in this partnership could ripple across regions and affect global energy, security, and trade systems.
Yes, Adam, I fully confirm. For the West, it is not just about observing a single country. It is about analyzing the potential combined impact of Iran, Russia, and China acting in concert. That is why intelligence, strategic planning, and diplomatic engagement remains central to Western responses today.
Exactly, Julia. The Western perspective is complex. It balances caution, strategic calculation, and the possibility of cooperation, all while trying to maintain stability and protect economic and security interests globally.
Yes, Adam, and I completely agree. It is a nuanced view that requires understanding both the potential challenges and the opportunities presented by this partnership, recognizing that the evolving alignment between these countries is reshaping the global strategic environment in real and measurable ways.
While we've been discussing the cooperation between Iran, Russia, and China, it's important to recognize that this partnership is not a formal military alliance. Unlike NATO or other defense pacts, these three countries do not have a binding agreement that obligates them to defend one another in case of conflict. Their cooperation is strategic and selective, based mainly on shared economic, diplomatic, and regional interests, rather than a permanent military commitment.
Exactly, Adam. People often assume that when countries coordinate closely, it means they act as one unit in all matters. But the reality is very different. Iran, Russia, and China each have distinct national priorities, domestic concerns, and geopolitical strategies. Cooperation exists in areas where interests overlap, but there are also limits because each country maintains its own sovereignty and decision-making processes.
For example, Russia is focused on asserting its influence in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and global energy markets. Its foreign policy decisions are often shaped by its historical relationships, security concerns, and desire to protect its status as a major global power. While Russia may cooperate with Iran and China, it will always prioritize its own national security and geopolitical objectives.
Similarly, Iran's priorities are largely regional. Its main concerns are security and influence in the Middle East, protecting its borders, and sustaining its economy despite sanctions. While cooperating with Russia and China can strengthen its position internationally, Iran's strategy is heavily influenced by immediate regional challenges, such as conflicts in neighboring countries or the presence of Western military forces nearby.
China's priorities are again different. Beijing is primarily focused on economic growth, energy security, and maintaining stability in its region, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. China is less directly concerned with Middle Eastern conflicts than Iran, and less involved in European or Central Asian territorial disputes than Russia. Its cooperation with the other two countries often centers on trade, infrastructure investment, and strategic energy supplies.
These differences mean that while the three countries can align on certain issues, they do not necessarily share the same approach to every global challenge. For instance, they may coordinate on energy exports or joint statements in international forums, but they might diverge when it comes to regional conflicts, trade negotiations with other countries, or military strategies in distant areas.
Another important factor is historical context. Russia, China, and Iran have different historical experiences that shape their foreign policies. Russia's legacy as a superpower, China's rise as a global economic giant, and Iran's history of sanctions and regional conflicts all influence how each country approaches international partnerships. These experiences can both strengthen and limit their ability to act cohesively.
Exactly, Adam. Even in economic matters, their priorities are not identical. While all three benefit from energy trade, infrastructure projects, and technology partnerships, the scale, focus, and timing of their investments differ. China often focuses on long-term economic gains, Russia emphasizes strategic leverage, and Iran prioritizes economic survival and regional influence.
Military cooperation also has boundaries. While joint exercises demonstrate coordination, each country maintains its own military doctrine, rules of engagement, and defense policies. These exercises are designed more to show mutual capability and signal strength, rather than create a binding operational alliance. Each country retains the freedom to act independently in situations that directly affect its national security.
Political systems also influence their interactions. Iran, Russia, and China have distinct governance structures, decision-making processes, and domestic priorities. These differences affect how quickly they can agree on joint actions, negotiate disputes, or implement policies across borders. Cooperation requires careful diplomacy and alignment of shared interests without compromising their internal agendas.
Even public messaging can differ. While joint statements are released to signal unity, the tone and emphasis may vary based on domestic audiences and international considerations. Each country communicates strategically to maintain its credibility at home and abroad, balancing cooperation with independence.
In summary, Adam, while the trilateral partnership between Iran, Russia and China is significant, it is carefully calibrated. Cooperation is selective, driven by shared interests in energy, trade, and regional influence. But it is constrained by differences in priorities, geography, military strategy, and domestic politics. This nuanced understanding is essential to interpreting the global significance of their partnership accurately.
As we examine the growing cooperation between Iran, Russia, and China, it becomes clear that these developments have broader implications for global politics. We are moving into an era where power is more diffuse, and influence is no longer concentrated in the hands of a single superpower. This is sometimes described as a shift from a unipolar world, dominated by the United States, toward a multipolar world, where multiple actors have the ability to shape outcomes across regions and globally.
Exactly, Adam. In practical terms, this means that countries now have more options when it comes to forming partnerships and alliances. Instead of relying solely on Western-led institutions or agreements, nations can engage with emerging powers like China and Russia, or with strategically positioned countries like Iran. This flexibility can influence trade, diplomacy, and security arrangements, creating a more complex geopolitical landscape.
One example of this complexity can be seen in energy politics. As Iran and Russia coordinate their energy exports and China secures access to critical resources, global energy markets become less dependent on traditional Western-led mechanisms. This reduces the ability of a single country or alliance to control prices or enforce sanctions effectively, and it forces all players to adapt to a more interconnected and competitive environment.
Yes, and this interconnectedness extends beyond energy. Economic, technological, and military partnerships are increasingly intertwined. Infrastructure projects like railways, pipelines, and ports are linking countries across continents, creating networks that can influence trade patterns, logistics, and even diplomatic leverage. As a result, countries must consider not only who they align with, but also how those alliances interact with other global partnerships.
This shift also affects security strategies. Traditional alliances like NATO remain important, but they now exist in a more complex environment. Potential adversaries or competitors can cooperate selectively on certain issues, while remaining independent in others. This creates uncertainty and requires careful strategic planning to anticipate both opportunities and challenges in regional and global security.
Absolutely, Adam. Another effect of this changing balance is that smaller and medium-sized countries gain more strategic options. They can engage with multiple powers to secure investments, military support, or diplomatic recognition. For instance, nations in the Middle East, Central Asia, and Africa are now able to negotiate partnerships with China, Russia, or Iran as alternatives or complements to traditional Western engagement.
We also see the implications for diplomacy. When countries like Iran, Russia, and China coordinate their positions in international forums, they can influence votes, negotiations, and resolutions. This is particularly significant in the United Nations and other multilateral organizations, where consensus building is key. A coordinated bloc can amplify its influence and challenge previously dominant narratives or policies.
Yes, and Adam, this often leads to more negotiation and compromise in global affairs. The West can no longer assume unilateral influence over international decisions. Instead, policymakers must navigate a multipolar environment, building coalitions, engaging in dialogue with diverse actors, and anticipating strategic moves by countries that may not share the same worldview or priorities.
Trade and economic strategy are also affected. With multiple influential partners, countries have more freedom to diversify supply chains and financial networks. China's investments in infrastructure, Russia's energy exports, and Iran's strategic location all contribute to alternative trade corridors that bypass traditional Western-led routes. This diversification can increase resilience, but also requires careful coordination and risk management.
Another important consideration is technology and military capability. Emerging powers are advancing rapidly in areas like artificial intelligence, missile technology, and cyber capabilities. When countries cooperate strategically, sharing knowledge, technology, and military exercises, it can accelerate capabilities and alter the balance of power. The West must take these developments into account when planning defense and security strategies.
We also see regional implications. In areas like the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Indo-Pacific, the alignment of Iran, Russia, and China can shift local power dynamics. Regional conflicts, trade negotiations, and resource management are all influenced by this trilateral coordination. Countries within these regions may adjust their foreign policies to accommodate the new reality of interconnected strategic players.
Absolutely, Adam. The complex balance of power also affects global governance. Climate negotiations, trade agreements, and international regulatory standards are now subject to input from a wider variety of influential countries. This can slow decision-making in some cases, but it can also lead to more representative and multifaceted solutions that reflect diverse perspectives.
It is also worth noting that this multipolar world increases the importance of diplomacy and strategic foresight. Countries must carefully analyze global trends, anticipate shifts in alliances, and maintain flexibility to respond to emerging opportunities or risks. Miscalculations can have consequences not only regionally but globally, given the interconnectedness of energy, finance, and security networks.
Finally, Adam, from my perspective, this evolving landscape reinforces the idea that global politics is no longer predictable or dominated by a single narrative. Understanding the motivations, capabilities, and priorities of multiple influential actors, like Iran, Russia, and China, is essential for interpreting international events accurately. It challenges policymakers, analysts, and even ordinary citizens to think more broadly about how the world is changing.
Yes, Julia, I fully confirm. The key takeaway is that global politics is becoming more complex, with shifting alliances, diverse strategic interests, and multiple centers of influence. For countries, investors, and observers alike, this means paying closer attention to how partnerships evolve and how cooperation among emerging powers shapes the international order.
I completely agree, Adam. Recognizing this new reality allows us to better understand current events and anticipate potential developments. The multipolar balance of power, driven by selective cooperation among major actors, is redefining the rules of international engagement in a way that will influence global politics for decades to come.
As we wrap up this discussion, it's clear that the world is entering a new era of global competition. The growing cooperation between Iran, Russia, and China demonstrates that power is becoming more distributed and that alliances are no longer fixed. From energy trade and infrastructure investment to military coordination and diplomatic engagement, these countries are strategically positioning themselves in ways that challenge traditional Western dominance. The key takeaway is that global politics today is shaped not only by individual countries but by complex networks of cooperation, interests, and influence that span continents.
Absolutely, Adam. It's also important for our listeners to remember that international politics is rarely simple. Countries may cooperate in some areas while competing in others, and decisions are often influenced by domestic priorities, regional tensions, and economic interests. Understanding these nuances is critical to making sense of world events and the potential impacts on everything from energy markets to regional stability.
Exactly, Julia. Another lesson is that energy and trade are at the heart of these strategic relationships. The Strait of Hormuz, global oil markets, and access to critical infrastructure highlight how geography and economics intertwine with geopolitics. Countries that control or influence these resources can shape outcomes far beyond their borders, which explains why the West is watching these developments so closely.
Yes, Adam, and for viewers, this is a reminder to follow global events carefully. Tracking international news, economic trends, and geopolitical shifts is not only important for policymakers but for anyone who wants to understand how the world is evolving. Even seemingly distant events can have direct effects on our economies, security, and daily lives.
It's also worth noting that this new era is about more than just competition. It's about adaptability and strategic thinking. Countries are forming partnerships, adjusting alliances, and responding to changing circumstances to secure their interests. This dynamic environment requires careful observation, analysis, and a willingness to consider multiple perspectives.
Exactly, Adam. And while the competition is real, there are also opportunities for cooperation. Diplomatic engagement, multilateral agreements, and constructive dialogue remain essential tools for addressing shared global challenges, from energy security to climate change and beyond. Understanding how countries navigate competition and collaboration can help us anticipate potential outcomes.
Another key point is that no single country can control the entire global system anymore. The rise of multipolarity means that influence is shared, contested, and constantly shifting. For students, professionals, and global citizens, recognizing this complexity is essential to understanding international events and their broader significance.
Yes, and Adam, from my perspective, this also underscores the importance of critical thinking. When analyzing international news, it's crucial to consider historical context, economic factors, strategic interests, and regional dynamics. Simplified explanations rarely capture the full picture, and understanding nuances can prevent misconceptions.
Exactly. Observing partnerships like that of Iran, Russia, and China helps us see the emerging patterns of global competition and cooperation. It also reminds us that actions taken in one part of the world, whether military drills, energy agreements, or trade deals, can ripple across continents and influence multiple regions simultaneously.
And for our listeners, staying informed is not just about following headlines. It's about understanding the underlying forces that shape those events. Energy routes, economic networks, military exercises, and diplomatic alignments are all pieces of a complex puzzle that define modern global politics.
Finally, the overarching lesson is that we live in a world of strategic interdependence. Countries are connected in ways that make unilateral actions less effective and collaboration more necessary. Observing these patterns gives us insight into the evolving global order and the strategies nations use to secure their place within it.
Absolutely, Adam. And I encourage all of our viewers to pay attention to global developments, think critically about the forces at play, and recognize that international politics is both intricate and constantly evolving. Staying informed is key to understanding not only the news of today, but also the potential shifts that will shape tomorrow.
Yes, Julia, following global events carefully allows us to see trends, anticipate changes, and understand the broader implications of international cooperation and competition. Awareness and analysis are essential for anyone who wants to navigate this complex world effectively.
Exactly, Adam. By observing how countries like Iran, Russia, and China interact with the rest of the world, we gain valuable insight into the emerging multipolar order. Our world is more interconnected, more competitive, and more dynamic than ever, and staying informed empowers us to understand its complexities.